Whoa, shit, man. It's real.
Little bit of a teaser there for everyone listening. Welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you. Today, I'm joined by a competitive strongman and powerlifter, as well as the founder of the Top Strength Project. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Steve Tripp. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How's it going with you?
I am not so bad. What's been happening in your world? What have you been up to recently?
It's been pretty it's been pretty straight out recently. I've had a lot of competitions myself, as well as hosting and traveling. Most recently, this past weekend was our sixth Ocean State Strongest Man and Woman. There are two federations here in the U.S. for strongman. There's the USS and the NAS. I happen to be the state rep for the USS, so I hold two shows a year here under the USS. And then a good friend of mine, Corey, is the NAS rep, so he holds shows here at my gym as well. It's our sixth one together. And I actually decided to jump in and compete in this one because a bunch of buddies from the gym were doing it and the events looked great. So we ended up having that here. We originally had 7 heavyweights competing, but it ended up dwindling down to 4 due to some injuries, people pulling out, one of which happened right here. A buddy of mine was submitting his overhead press for the OSG qualifier. You must have some guys out there submitting videos for the OSG.
Yeah.
And he's a very prolific overhead presser, my buddy Nick Cicente. And he hit 465 on a jerk very convincingly. I mean, he weighs probably 260, 270. So
right.
Those of you that lift weights, I mean, anyone overhead pressing mid-4s is fucking world class, but this kid's like 260. And he's like, I think I'm gonna go for 5. And we're all like, you should, because it floated. And he put 5 on the bar and he dipped and went to press it, and both of his legs just exploded. His right knee broke, and then the left one shortly after. So he had to get him taken out of here, and he had to get surgery on both knees. So we ended up actually using the competition as kind of a hub to raise some money. So all the profits went to him. We started a GoFundMe. People were sending me Venmos. So we're already at like a little over $7,500
right
to raise for him just during his recovery. He's a full-time truck driver. So that was just heartbreaking to see. So we were able to raise some money for him, which is great. And I think that's worth mentioning as we speak about strongman and the strength community as a whole. Not all people know this guy from here, but myself, a good friend of mine, Nico, Corey, who put on the show, and Tom, we all came together. We said, we got to help this guy out. And we put it out there, and everybody contributed just like that. It says a lot about the community. I'm sure you have experienced that yourself. Just a very supportive, cohesive community that I feel very fortunate to be a part of and facilitate here in my gym.
Yeah, definitely. There's, especially from coming from a team sport background, playing rugby, to then get involved in powerlifting and strongman. It's something that is awesome to see, the community side of things, because we don't all get paid to compete in strongman or powerlifting. Yes, there might be prize money or anything like that, but like what you mentioned there, a full-time truck driver, it's going to be however long it's off work. So the fact that straight away people came around to support him is awesome. I know, looking at there was a couple of injuries. I saw a couple of people pull out of sort of world's strongest man for injuries and that sort of stuff, and people have come around, which is awesome to see. So hopefully, his recovery will go well. Because injuries like that, you don't really, you don't want to see that. I went to go watch Britain's Strongest Man. And unfortunately, I can't remember the guy's name, which is annoying. But he was doing the Atlas stones, and he missed putting the stone on, and then it fell back onto his knee, which is just like accidents like that, and the amount of times that you do it in training and everything goes well. It's just those fine margins.
There's risk associated with what we do, and we all accept that. And we do our best. Hopefully, the most of us do our best to, take precautions to mitigate those risks. But accidents can happen, especially with this specific scenario. There were very few warning signs, and it just happened, and it's devastating. It's devastating to see. So I think it's important that we all come together and help, help our friends, help our brothers and sisters, when they're in a tough time, because it's a community oriented thing. Especially because I've competed in powerlifting. I played football as well. I did track and field throughout high school and college. And then, I got into lifting weights obviously around that time. And I've been doing it for 22 years now, which is crazy to think. I started when I was 13. I'm 35 now. And when I started competing in CrossFit and powerlifting, what really separates strongman from those other two, and not to say that people don't support each other, but as in those other two facets of competition, but in strongman, I can genuinely say that everybody wants to see everybody just do well, even if it's at the expense of losing themselves. I can speak upon that. One of my first competitions, it actually was my first competition, New York Strongest Man in 2017. It was really down to me and one other guy. And he and I were going back and forth all day. And the final event was a match stone. And like I said, it was really down to me and this one other guy. And I was new. I didn't have any wraps. I don't use wraps now. I just use my bare arm. But at the time, he recommended, he's like, hey, try, he was a farmer from up in Maine, a couple states north of here. And he was like, try this horse wrap. So he wrapped my forearms, tacked me up, and he wanted to see me hit the 400 stone, because that would have been, that was a New York record. And again, this isn't a friend, this isn't a coach, this isn't some other competitor. This is literally the other competitor that I was going back and forth with for the win. And he took the time to wrap my forearms and set me up to hit that stone. And I did, thanks to his help. And he actually missed it and gave me the win. So I think that speaks volumes about the community and the culture of this sport, where, there are risks involved, like I said, and we all just genuinely want to see each other do epic shit, even if it comes at the cost of potentially losing. We just want to see everybody do well. And I think that's very, very special and hard to find elsewhere in a competitive environment.
Yeah, definitely. I think that line there, everyone wants to see people do epic shit, is the tagline, because that's what people want to see. That's why, I remember growing up watching Strongman as a kid when it's on around Christmas, and you want to see people do these things. And even in
you see them interacting. They're all boys. Boys. There's there are riffs here and there, and a lot of it is probably just for show, but you can see them. They're all there competing against each other, but together. There's a sense of togetherness and cohesiveness. And I think it's just because of the nature of the sport. We're picking up stones and pulling trucks and picking up odd apparatus and hitting massive deadlifts. And we just want to see everyone do epic shit. And I think that's really special. And like I said, I feel very grateful and fortunate to be a part of it, and to be able to facilitate others that may have started here in my gym, just as a general population guy or girl looking to get stronger and feel better. And they see us screwing around with the implements, and they're like, hey, can I try that stuff? And I mean, dozens of people have joined and worked strongman and strength sports into their training. And many of them compete with me now. And it's just such a special thing to be able to offer people.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So I did a brief introduction, but you've touched on there about your first competition, getting involved in strongman, powerlifting, but also your gym and coaching. For everyone listening who might not know your background in strength sports, in coaching, do you just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I started lifting weights when I was young. I was 13 years old. And I started lifting weights really because the girl I had a crush on called me Titty Boy at a pool party. And I wasn't really upset. I mean, I was a little embarrassed because it was in front of everybody, but I kind of felt more informed than anything. As a young kid, you're growing up, I was going through puberty, my body was changing, and I definitely didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. But that was kind of like an aha moment for me, like, yeah, I kind of do have boobs, and I am chubby, and I do feel like shit. I'm going to start lifting weights. So fast forward a few years, I got very involved in the gym, and I just really loved the way that I felt when I lifted weights, and I hated the way that I felt when I didn't, if that makes sense. The 2 or 3 hours I was training and the couple hours after, I felt good. I liked feeling tight and pumped up, and then that would go away, and I couldn't wait to do it again the next day. And that really kind of kept me in the gym, honestly, for the first 8 to 10 years, just chasing that feeling. I got into a pretty serious head-on collision coming home from work. I fell asleep at the wheel. I was sick. I probably shouldn't have been working, but I was doing construction. I went into the lane and I hit a kid coming the other way. He was fine. Luckily, he had a newer model car with an airbag. I had an older truck, and I was crushed. I shattered my jaw, broke both arms, broke both legs, lost. You know, I'm 6'5". I was probably 230 at the time of the accident. And when I got my cast off and my jaw unwired, I was around 150 pounds. So 6'5",
Wow.
150. If you can imagine what that looks like. And I just, you know, I was young and I didn't really know what the next step was, but I knew I wanted to feel good again. So I started training. I ended up going to Bridgewater State University now, and I ended up getting back in shape. And I walked on my sophomore year, was fortunate to play defensive end there for 4 years. And then I started working as a trainer. I started at a commercial gym. I was there for 4 years, went to another commercial gym that opened up locally, and then eventually went on my own and opened the Top Strength Project. It's 6.5 years now. My first location was kind of a smaller studio, and it was just myself, a few other trainers, and our clients, a small membership. And that's when I got involved in competing in strength sports. It was never a goal of mine or anything I wanted to do, but what ended up happening is a few clients and members had an interest in competing in powerlifting. So I was like, fuck it, well, let's do it. So I did it too. And I ended up winning the first meet. This is probably 5.5 years ago. And I ended up winning my class. That particular competition had geared lifters though, guys in suits. So I wasn't able to win the overall because for whatever reason, there was only one overall winner. So obviously the guys squatting and benching in suits put up a bigger total. So I didn't win the overall, but my second and third, I did. And I just continued to, like I said, I guess I'm a powerlifter now. So I continued to compete in powerlifting. And then shortly after, a trainer that was working with me at my gym was a competitive strongman. And he said, I want to do New York's Strongest Man. Would you be interested in sponsoring me? Can I wear a shirt? Whatever. I said, I'll do it with you. And I went to New York and I won New York. And then I ended up going to nationals that year. And I was on pace to win, to be honest. The second to last event was a sandbag carry. And I had a fall as I crossed the finish line. I landed on this arm. It was a 300-pound sandbag. And I didn't realize it, but I had crushed my arm. I had broken my electron clean through. And I was tied for second at the time. And we went into the stone. It was a 365 AMRAP over bar. And very strong event for me. I hit 5 or 6 reps in training. And I was in the back of the pack. And I was watching all the other competitors. There was 60 in my class. People are zeroing, getting 1, 2, 3 reps. I'm like, I'm going to fucking take this thing, you know? But I reached down to grab the stone and I had nothing in my arm. So I ended up going home, getting an x-ray, and it was completely broken. So I had 10 screws and 2 plates put in. This is 5.5 years ago. And to be honest, my arm's never been the same. I've had multiple surgeries, tricep reattachment, prolotherapy, PRP. I've used peptides, countless hours of PT, and my tricep still just doesn't fire. So it dramatically affects my ability to press, overhead press especially, but bench press as well. But I've continued to compete, and I've won just about every show I've done, every powerlifting meet and every strongman show. In strongman, I tend to have to zero the overhead event depending on what it is. But if I win all the other events, it's enough to win. And I've won probably 15 competitions since, local state shows. Same thing with powerlifting. You know, my legs are strong enough that I'm able to put up enough of a total with a subpar bench to still pull off a win. And I went back to compete at nationals 3 weeks ago, and I was going to win. It was definitely my show to win, but I ended up having some trouble with this arm for the overhead event, and it actually went numb on me. I couldn't feel that it was numb because of the nerve damage that I'm dealing with, but it was numb. And I went to press the overhead implement and I had no use of my left arm. I won all 4 other events, but it wasn't enough to make up for the points I lost in the overhead. And I ended up taking 3rd overall, and I had a full-blown adult temper tantrum. I'm still not over it. I'm fucking furious. So I'm in the process of getting this fixed. I had an MRI on my neck, and it turns out I have some compressed vertebrae in my neck that are responsible for the nerve in this arm that controls the tricep the
Right.
brachialis and the deltoid. So I'm in the process of figuring that out and trying to get that fixed. But it's been a great ride. I never had intentions of opening a gym, but I was encouraged to do so 6.5 years ago when I did. I expanded to a 10,000 square foot facility 3.5 years ago, and it's been great. And it was never the plan. It's been a day by day kind of organic process, and it's become something really special to me and a lot of other people. And it's just been quite a process, quite a journey. And I'm very grateful to be where I am today, be able to do things like this. I started my own podcast recently that airs, the first episode drops on the 1st, and just continuing to compete, train clients, grow the culture here. And yeah, that's kind of the jam.
Oh, cool. I always like to ask that question because it's, everyone gets involved in training for a variety of reasons, but they stick at it because they enjoy it. They want to, that's the whole reason why, starting out playing rugby, I always got told I needed to put more size on. Look at that now, and I compete in the under 120 class in powerlifting. So I think I managed to put a bit of weight on, but you keep enjoying it, and like what we mentioned at the start, the community side of things. And I think it's pretty cool that the fact that you've had an injury to your arm and still being able to compete but also win is cool. And it's interesting that tried quite a lot of things. And hopefully, get to the bottom and see some progress in there. Because if you're, winning with that injury, there's a lot more there if that gets sorted. The other question that I always like to ask, because especially with the competitions that you've done, and you can see that you enjoy, strength sports, who have been your biggest influences on your training or coaching? Because you see, the lifts that you do, and it's kind of like, okay, well, who do you look at in terms of, okay, that's pretty cool. What can I learn from this? Or that's pretty cool. Who are your biggest influences, would you say?
This is a question I get asked every time I do one of these. My answer sucks. I don't have anybody that really sticks out. And one of the first podcasts I did, it was actually with Tony and Greg. And their response to that was like, well, that's great. You kind of made your own way and kind of developed your own craft, which I think is good. But I also wonder if I had a mentor or, a handful of guys that I may have looked up to in the onset, maybe I could have made more process and been guided and perhaps be further than I am today if I did have something like that. But I can say that when I first started competing, and I started seeking some coaching, one of the first coaches I hired was Brandon Allen out of Las Vegas, a very prolific powerlifter, but also dabbles in strongman. I worked with him for a little over a year, and I learned a tremendous amount from him in reference to programming and progressive overload and different applications of it, a lot of which I still use today in my own training with my clients. I also have been very fortunate here to work with great coaches. It's a shared space. It's a collaborative. I'm surrounded by phenomenal resources. One of which was John Amore, who trained at my last location. He had a huge influence on me. I learned a ton from him. And then Ben Trebelli, a powerlifter here. He's very much responsible for bringing my deadlift from kind of a hingy, very extended pattern. I had the state record at the time at 733. And I ended up getting injured, and I started working with him. And within 6 months, I went from a 733 grind that stole my soul in 6 months to an 800 double, just based upon his technique and programming adjustments. Since then, I've been fortunate enough to work with Matt Wenning. I had him out here for a weekend seminar, which was great. So I learned his kind of application and processes of the conjugate method, which was great. And I implement some of those processes and techniques into my training and my client training as well. I'm also very close with Stan Efferding, who you had on, right? I mean, he's just a fucking pioneer, that guy, and also for somebody who's so busy and has such a full plate. I get texts from him sometimes on a weekly or monthly basis, just checking in, saying what's up, seeing how things are going. If I ever need him, I shoot him a text, gets right back to me. Just such a humble guy and such a wealth of knowledge. And what I like about all the people I just mentioned is they walk the walk, they talk the talk, but they also walk the walk, which I can really appreciate. You know, I've been around a lot of exercise physiologists who claim to know all the ins and outs of training and adaptation and all that. But you know what? They don't know what this shit feels like. And I really love working with guys that do both. Pat Davidson is another one who I think was a guest on your show.
Yeah.
He and I are close as well. He's been a great resource. And I recently worked for a couple months with Josh Bryant of Jailhouse Strong,
yeah.
who was also great. You know, I loved a lot of the tact and principles and approaches he had to training, which is just great to learn and implement into my own programming as well. So it's really just about, you know, always being a student of this practice. The more that I feel that I think I know, the more I realize I don't. And there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of different ways to apply it and manipulate it. And being fortunate enough to have a facility to fly people out, and also to be able to travel and connect with these brains and bronze of the industry has served me very, very well. And it's something I plan to do for forever, you know, just constantly trying to grow and learn from the strongest in the world, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I can completely buy into, because a couple of names that you've mentioned there, to be honest with you, on a real selfish note, the reason why I want to speak to people such as yourself, you know, and the other people that you've mentioned there, number one, I think, you know, especially to the listeners who have an interest in strength, you know, this podcast started out that, you know, clients were asking me questions, and then it got to a point where I didn't feel as though I had enough knowledge to give them a good enough answer. I wanted to go and, you know, seek the answers from people who are more experienced, who have been there and done it. And, you know, the people that you've mentioned and yourself, you know, have been in the trenches, competed, but then also done that with clients as well. And I think that speaks a lot more, rather than saying, yeah, do this. All right, so have you done that before? Oh no, it'd be like me coaching tennis, and I've never done tennis before. I could probably tell people to, yeah, just whack the ball over the net, but, you know, there's more to it. And especially one thing that you said there is, you know, they don't know what it feels like to be underneath the bar, to have a grinder on the deadlift. And there's kind of two things that I wanted to ask from what you've mentioned there. You've mentioned about the programming and what you've learned from. Do you incorporate sort of the powerlifting and strongman together, or do you go through powerlifting, or have you been through powerlifting and strongman sort of phases of training? And in terms of, you know, you've obviously competed yourself, like you mentioned a couple of times, clients wanting to compete, or I'll do it with you. Do you think that is, or how do you think that has impacted on your coaching by, you know, leading by example? So hopefully that makes sense. Two questions there.
It does. So let's answer the second one first. I think the biggest thing with coaching and programming and as a client, it's buy-in. You know, if you ask me, everything works. It all works, okay? Especially if you're just getting started. It's only when you're top 5, top 10% in the, I don't want to say in the world, because in the world, it's really the top 0.5%, but in the gym community, in the gym culture, in the competitive realm, unless you're top 10% in the world, you don't really have to be that concise and that super specific, in my opinion. Everything works as long as you're able to get the individual to comply and buy in and follow what you ask them to do to the number, so you can then take feedback and make adjustments. So I definitely would say that when I work with somebody, they know that I would never ask them or recommend them do something that I haven't done myself, or I'm not currently doing at that time. And something you said earlier that I really liked is that you said when people asked you about X, Y, and Z, you were okay to say, I don't know, let me figure it out. That's the most important characteristic of a coach or a professional in this industry to have, is to be able to say, I don't know, and communicate and say that I'm learning right along with you, you know, and being able to go out. It takes a certain level of humility and self-awareness to be able to do that. And I commend you for having that gauge and that perspective, because the moment you think you know everything or try and pretend that you do, that's the moment you stop growing and stop learning and stop being relevant. So I applaud you and I appreciate you for that approach, because I really try and have the same. in reference to how I structure my own training and really everyone else's training in reference to powerlifting versus strongman, or really powerlifting with strongman, is for me, the baseline foundation is always going to be the barbell lifts, the squat, the overhead press, the deadlift, and the horizontal press or the bench press. Those are always going to be the staples year round. And when I approach a strongman competition, I'll initially, let's say 12 to 16 weeks out, I'll work in the implements kind of towards the end of training, just to get some touches and get some kind of submaximal pre-fatigued work in the implements, in the events. And the reason why I have that approach is because if I improve my squat and my deadlift and my ability to press with a barbell, those are going to make my implement and event work better. It's going to improve those things. Improving my squat is going to make everything better. Stones, carries, lifts, having a sound squat that always takes the priority, that always is at the helm of your training, is going to bring everything up. Obviously, deadlifting, very important in strongman, and variations of, but the traditional from the floor deadlift bar with regular plates is always going to be the staple. If I'm approaching an event and I have, say, an axle at 13 inches, my deadlift is still going to be the 8-inch deadlift from the floor. Is it 8 inches? It's 8 inches. And I'll treat the variation, the axle from 13, as my secondary lift. That would be like my B lift, or maybe if I deadlift twice a week, that would be my second day. The traditional compound lifts always reign supreme in my training. And then as I get closer and closer to the strongman event or competition, maybe those lifts, those event lifts, will creep their way up in as far as on the training days. So maybe if I have a yoke carry, that would be at the end of my squat day. But maybe as I get closer to competition, depending on where I am relative to the demands of the competition, I'll move the yoke up and I'll squat first and then do my yoke carry. My stone or loading event, I'll usually do that on my hinge day or my deadlift day. So in the onset, it would be deadlifts first, loading event last. But as I get closer and closer to the competition, the loading event will be kind of closer, maybe my second or third lift of the day. Depending, if I'm not close or comfortable with comp weight, maybe I'll get a bit more work. But if I'm there and I have the strength, the demands of the specific event, maybe I'll keep it at the end of the workout, because that's even more sport specific, because as you know, the stones is usually the last event of the day. Yeah. But basically, in short, the compound lifts, the barbell lifts always reign supreme. They're always the foundation year round, regardless. Even if I don't have a squat coming up in a strongman show, I'm still squatting all the way up to the competition. And I use those to build the implement lifts. Because I don't believe that the inverse is true. I don't think if I prioritize stones, odd implement lifts, loading, those won't make my compound lifts better. So I find that really prioritizing those compound lifts builds a better system and a more well-rounded, capable athlete. So those usually tend to take priority. And I also usually will compete. I'll usually do a strongman and a powerlifting meet kind of simultaneously, maybe like 2 weeks or a month apart, because strength is strength, strong is strong. And if I'm peaked, I may as well get a couple competitions in before I go into an off season.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that that you said at the end there, that the barbell lifts will complement the strongman training, but not necessarily just doing strongman training will complement. That's your foundation. Bigger squat, bigger deadlift. That's going to have a carryover into other things. Do you think that from that was that refining that over time, to settle on something that's right, okay, so now I know where I can, add that in, like what you said about getting closer to an event, because obviously starting with powerlifting, that was sort of the entry point for people who, general population, just want to get stronger. The entry point is, if you can squat, this is what we're going to build from. And then obviously now strongman, like I know in Leeds, there's the access to strongman kit and training is really easy. There's a lot more gyms doing that. Do you think, for yourself? Was that a process of refining that over time to settle on something that you felt was beneficial? And then the second part, I'm doing two-parters all the time here. The second part is, do you think the entry point now, people are making that decision between powerlifting or strongman, whereas actually they could probably do both, because that entry point to do strength training is a lot easier now because there's more access to it?
And also, there are no requisite numbers you need to have to do powerlifting.
Yeah.
It's just your lifts. You know, you can squat 50, you can squat 1,000, whatever. But when you do a strongman competition, it's this implement, this weight. So there's a cost or a price of entry, right? So again, because of the availability of equipment, but also just the way that the body adapts. You know, if you focus upon the compound lifts and the barbell lifts, they will bring everything else up without a doubt. And as far as how much you need to frequently work on those event lifts is dependent upon where your strength falls relative to the demands of the competition.
Yeah, definitely. Because you mentioned a couple of times as well about, injuries, and there's sometimes, or what your thoughts are, sometimes people are doing powerlifting think, oh, I'm not going to do strongman. There's too much movement. There's too many things that might go wrong. Whereas, squat, bench and deadlift, everything is up and down. Whereas actually, I know obviously you've mentioned a couple of injuries that you've had there, but you've also mentioned about, a complete athlete, that you can do different movement patterns and become more athletic, because people forget that strongman isn't just like powerlifting where it's a 1 rep max. You're doing carrying events, which there needs to be some sort of athleticness in that. What are your kind of thoughts when people mention that, about, oh no, I don't want to do strongman because there's too much variability, whereas actually, can it be ridiculous?
Why do we get involved in training and lifting weights? It's to eliminate limitations, not create new ones. You want to create a more capable, you want to be a more capable human, right? A more capable organism. That's why we're strength training. So this whole idea to be tunnel vision and be like, oh, well, I'm a power lifter. I don't need to do sets of 5, 8, 10, and 20 because I'm just going for a 1 rep max. Get the fuck out of here, man. You got to have volume. You need time under tension. You have to do the accessory lifts, the remedial lifts, the machine work to build some muscle, to facilitate some lean tissue growth that you can then apply to the strength sports. Being a holistic athlete, I think, not only raises your ceiling, but also dramatically decreases the chances of injury. And it just makes you a more capable person. It's just laziness. It's just laziness. People come in, they just want to squat, bench, deadlift, and go home. It's like, what about everything else? What about everything else? And also maintaining a lean body composition so that, fat isn't contractile tissue. Muscle is contractile tissue. So feeding yourself and being disciplined with your nutrition in addition to your training, they serve each other. Why leave all these potential gains off the table because you just want to improve your squat, bench, and deadlift, when actually if you eat in a manner that facilitates your training and fuels your training and facilitates your recovery, and also being well-rounded and being able to jump, run, move, carry, it's only going to increase your ceiling for those compound competitive lifts. And in my case, I can tell you definitively, all the injuries I've had and aches and pains that I deal with, if I didn't, my volume work, my hypertrophy work, it's to build muscle, but it's also to create circulation and almost facilitate recovery so that my joints and my muscles and all my soft tissue feels as good as it can feel. I don't think anyone that's squatting 800 and deadlifting 900 is going to have pain-free knees and a pain-free back. It just kind of comes with the territory. But I can tell you, if I didn't do all the other things that I did in reference to my volume training and the way that I feed myself, I wouldn't be able to squat, press, and deadlift the way that I do. It just wouldn't be there. Yeah,
definitely. And one thing that you said there is, doing all the other things that you want to, that you should be doing, because the obviously, I know touching on powerlifting, that's quite specific. You know, the training is what the competition is going to be. Whereas, you know, you need to be a human and do all of these different, you know, movements rather than being, you know, just fixated on those certain movements. In terms of when it comes to,
if you don't mind me saying, I'll make one more point.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest gripes with powerlifting is, as a whole, is that because it's so specific and you're in control of every variable. You know the barbell you're using, you know the gear you're allowed to use, and you know the rules. What ends up happening in powerlifting as a whole is that people start to lean more towards leverage advantages and you know, these really wide sumo stance deadlifts and these ridiculous wide grip benches with obnoxious arches and wide stance squatting. It's like, whatever happened to muscular development? You know, whatever happened to being able to move in a way that you're athletic and authentically strong everywhere, not just strong in these really, you know, wide stance, wide grip, you know, lowering the range of motion to increase how much weight you can put on the bar. I mean, I understand that you want to lift as much weight as possible in powerlifting, but, you know, I'm 6'5". I have a pretty shallow stance, you know, shoulder width apart squat. I deadlift conventionally. I'll never compete in sumo ever. And I have, you know, a normal bench press, a normal arch. You know, you look at people like John Hack and Kevin Oak, who are some of the best in the world. You know, John Hack has a high bar, vertical position, knee over toe squat. That is authentic strength everywhere. He's got a flat, almost close grip bench, and he's got a normal conventional deadlift. And that is truly true, authentic strength. And you know what? He doesn't get injured a whole lot because he's going through full ranges, and I believe he prioritizes that, and that builds a more resilient system, a more resilient organism.
Do you think from what you've mentioned about there, especially when you go to the extremes of, you know, crazy arches, crazy wide stances, just going back to when we said about, you know, leading by example by having, you know, not giving people something that you either don't know or haven't tried yourself. Do you think sometimes in some corners of the coaching world that by them seeing other people do those extremes, that they're giving unrealistic expectations to people who are just coming in, who just want to get stronger, rather than being, look, let's work on this, let's stay with this stance, and let's just put some muscle mass on. Let's just, you know, let's go through this as a process.
Yeah, it's communicating that, you know, that's not you, that's them. And also just realizing that in the process of preparation for a competition, there should be a postseason, preseason, in-season, off-season approach. And it's so important to work in other variables and other versions of these compound lifts to improve and increase your movement variability, to, again, increase your ceiling and decrease the chances of injury. So in the off-season, so right now, so I just finished competing. I'm a low bar, high heel elevated squatter. And now I'm doing front squats, flat heel. It's very, very challenging. It's very, very humbling. I can't move as much weight with those movements as I can in the hingy low bar, but it's going to serve me, you know, prioritizing these squattier, flat shoe patterns is going to improve my ability to do the low bar hingy patterns. The opposite isn't true. If I just squat low bar year round, it may only improve my low bar, but that comes at a cost. If I'm training the same patterns over and over and over again, that's where you get overuse issues, compensatory issues, chronic pain, chronic injuries. So cycling in other lifts, especially during the off season piece of your programming, is going to serve you long term. So just constantly throwing in variables, you know, being so sport specific, I think isn't the show. I think it's important to be a little more dynamic and work in other lifts to, again, create more movement variability and just create a more sound, dynamic system.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there about the different phases of training, because, you know, it can be really specific. Whereas if you're, I don't know, 6 months out from a competition, you know, there's no reason why you can't have a bit more variety in training, because then that way it makes it a little bit more enjoyable, adds in some different movement patterns rather than, you know, that thought process of too much variety, but it doesn't have to be, you know, as long as it's variety for variety's sake, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, you know, implementing variety is going to help just make you more dynamic and less susceptible to injury. I mean, think of it this way. This is a pretty decent way to kind of conceptualize what we're talking about. If you look at like a cable machine, the cable wears and wears and eventually breaks. And what you notice is that cable does a specific job, right? It's the same movement over and over again. And when you notice that cable wears and wears and wears and eventually breaks, it's at one spot. The rest of the cable looks brand new. So to apply that concept to your ligaments, tendons, joints, and muscles, if you're doing the same pattern over and over again, it's going to apply stresses and damage to the same spot over and over and over again. And that's where these chronic pain and chronic issues come up. So I can tell you, if my knees are bothering me and I offer myself some variety, or my back's bothering me, if I, rather than doing low bar, if I get under a SSB, or if I do a high heel elevated goblet squat and create a more neutral position, and it's still a squat, it's still improving my ability to squat, but it's distributing the force and the stress over the tissues in a different pattern, in a different way. And that allows me to adapt and become more resilient and fortify my joints and fortify my ligaments and tendons, so that when I go back to the competition specific lift, that chronic pain should be gone, or at least mitigated, so that I can then progress, right, and build.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of an analogy, and I quite like that cable one.
Well, it's pretty sensible, right? Yeah. Like if I have pain in my elbow right here, right, and I'm bench pressing, let's say and it's obviously not going to be the exact same, we're not robots, but my bench press is my bench press, and that's applying, and when I bench, it hurts my elbow. Well, what if I were to add a small incline or a decline, or maybe go to a neutral press? And now all of a sudden, I mean, I'm not a physicist, but I can assume all of a sudden this doesn't really bother me anymore. I'm still doing elbow flexion and extension. I'm still flexing and contracting those muscles, but it doesn't bother the tendon anymore. That's because that load and the stress of the pattern is going to be distributed over that soft tissue differently. And it's going to give the weaker part, or for whatever reason I have that pain, a chance to adapt and be it recover, while I stress other tissues, and that will bring it up. You know, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So it's so important to try and address and bring those weaker links up to bring the entire lift up. If you improve a piece of a movement, you're going to improve the whole.
Yeah, definitely. And when you mentioned there about, you know, changing, you know, using the example of the bench press, changing it around, you're still training strength, you're still getting stronger, rather than, you know, that analogy of the cable machine, you know, just keep flogging a dead horse and then, you know, actually causing more harm than good. Do you think from a powerlifter's perspective, because I know obviously, what was going through my head then was, I actually was able to host a seminar a couple of years ago with Brian Shaw, came over to Leeds and did a seminar, and he was talking about, this is the equipment that I use and work around. So he's still training strength, but just making sure that he's going to injure himself. Do you think, you know, where powerlifters differ to maybe strongmen is that there's maybe a fear of moving too far away from the competition lifts, because it's only those competition lifts that matter coming to competition? Yeah,
I do think that very, very much. And even strongmen can be guilty of it, where it's like, oh, they have a circus dumbbell coming up, so they just train circus dumbbell. You know, it's my approach that the mainstay is, you know, you have to build horsepower, you have to build your system to be strong. So still the bilateral coordination of the overhead press is going to be the baseline. And then you can get into the more technique-oriented specificity of the demands of the competition and do circus dumbbell. I'm not going to eliminate my base foundation just to try and improve upon something that has a little more specificity to it. The baseline stuff still has to be there.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think When you're doing or from your training, doing both at the same time, is there anything where, because we've said about the positives of it being able to incorporate both at the same time, is there any time, or have you had in the past had anything where they've conflicted against each other and worked each other? Have you ever got it wrong where you kind of go too far towards the strongman side of things, or it actually starts impacting your performance? Has that ever happened or anything?
Well, personally, because of the issues with my upper body, with this arm, it's kind of a pro and a con. I lean more towards frequency to improve a skill. So if I'm able to press 4 times a week, I think that's the best way to improve my press is having 3 submaximal days and 1 maximal day. But now when we're talking about prepping for both strongman and powerlifting, I need to press vertical or press horizontal, and I have to press vertical as well, right? So if I have 4 press days a week, how am I going to divide that amongst those 2 demands? So usually I'll kind of favor one. So, and it usually tends to be overhead if I'm prepping for strongman, because that's much more challenging for me. But it's more challenging because I'm weaker, but where I'm weaker, it's also less costly, right? So I can overhead press very, very frequently because it's so pathetic and weak. It doesn't cause a lot of fatigue to recover from. So that's kind of one of the challenges, is basically you have to choose one and prioritize one. I could go 2 and 2, but maybe 3 and 1, be it 3 bench days, 1 overhead, or 1 overhead, 3 bench. So kind of manipulating the frequency and appropriating that based upon the demands. Bench press is always bench press. But if I have, an implement or an event that I need a lot of practice to improve to get to comp weight, I may have to favor overhead at the cost of developing my bench press to what it potentially could be if I was just prepping for a powerlifting meet. And then overall, I mean, sure, if I was just doing a powerlifting prep, would I be able to put up a bigger total if I wasn't training for both simultaneously? Absolutely. Most likely. Same thing if I was just prepping for strongman. Would I be able to perform better in the strongman competition? Yeah, most likely. But the thing is with powerlifting, I want to hit as much weight as possible, right? To beat my previous total and also beat everyone else that's there. As much weight as possible. In strongman, I just have to do enough to win the event. Yeah. So if I want to get that 500 bench, that's going to take a lot to get there, where I just have to be able to do X amount of reps with this overhead lift to get enough to get the points in first place. So that's kind of another thing to take into consideration too when you're planning out your training. If I'm very proficient in an event and I'm confident I have what I need for the win, maybe I won't train it as much. Maybe I don't need to. And then that opens up more space to focus upon the things that I feel like I do need to improve upon to be able to be competitive and get the points. That's one of my favorite things about strongman, is that it's 5 events or 6 events, and every event is just as valuable. Every event's worth the same points, and it's funny because I was guilty of not working my grip and not working my carries as much as my static lifts, because the static lifts are more epic. I want to hit that big deadlift. I want to hit that big stone. I want to hit that big press. But you know what? First place in a deadlift, pulling 900 pounds, is just as much points as a max farmer's hold. It's the same points. They have the same value, even though you could argue that the deadlift is bigger and more epic and much more costly and much more challenging, perhaps a much greater example and display of true strength. It's not more valuable when it comes to points than a grip or a hold or a sprint, So it's important to prioritize everything and make sure that you're in a position to get as much points as possible in all the events. You can't be a one-trick pony, because you're not going to be able to pull it off. You have to be well-rounded and sound everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. There were some really good points in there. And as you were talking, you could see that you were kind of thinking about lessons that you'd learned from, all the same points apply to strongman in powerlifting. If you were more specific, right, then you're going to be able to put more focus on, squat, bench, or deadlift. From there, in terms of lessons learned through strength, if you like, and getting stronger, do you think, you know, a lot more of the lessons and the progress that you've been able to make have been through the training that you've, you know, trialed and errored with, or from actually competing? And a little bit like the guy that you mentioned, you know, who was saying, right, we'll wrap your arms, this is how we can do the stone. Where do you think your biggest lessons have been learned through strength, the training side of things, or the competition, or both?
Definitely all of the above. I would say that if I were to make a pie wheel of like everything that contributes to me as an athlete and as a coach, what fills the majority of that pie wheel, at least 2/3 of it, is through my own training. You know, so like what makes me effective, if I can be considered effective as a coach, is that I've been there. I know what it feels like. You know, so when someone's like, "Hey, this is bothering me," I know what they're talking about. You know, I'm not a big reader, I'm not a big research guy, but I know what this feels like, and I know what's probably contributing and causing it, and I can give you something to remedy it. So really the seat time and the hours and hours, I mean, the tens of thousands of hours that I've accumulated under the bar is definitely where the vast majority of my learning has come from. I mean, I have a degree in exercise physiology from Bridgewater State. I'm not going to say that it's useless. You know, I definitely pull from some of that knowledge in the back of my mind, but it's really the experience and the time that I spent training myself that serves me to be able to help and communicate this to others, because that's a very important aspect too, is actually being able to communicate what you know or what you think you know. Let's say if in this hand you have this guy who's very, very well educated and knows literally everything there is to know about training and adaptation and programming, but then you have this guy that lifts and knows maybe 10% of what this guy knows. This is the guy that's going to build a successful training business, because he's able to communicate and relate that information to individuals much better than this guy. This guy might be great to coach coaches, but to coach people and athletes in general pop who pay the bills, even though this guy only knows 10% of what this guy knows, his ability to communicate it and be relatable is going to yield more success, I think, as a professional in the industry. What some very valuable lessons I've learned about competing is how to properly peak, and how much rest is necessary during your training, but also before competition. So when I first started competing, you know, I wasn't as strong as I am now. So I could basically train my ass off right up to the meet and compete and do well. And then I could probably get right back to training when you know, the Monday after the competition, I'd feel fine. As I got stronger and stronger, you think that because you're fitter and stronger and more adept, that, you know, maybe you can do more and you don't need as much rest, but it's actually the opposite. The more skilled you get in the lift, so let's take powerlifting, for example, it's like if you have somebody that, let's say, is 3 to 5 years old as far as their training age, someone that's 8 to 10 years old, this guy's max, the beginner's max isn't like his true max, right? Because he's not very skilled in the lifts. So let's say if he has a 300-pound squat, that doesn't represent how much weight. I mean, it is how much weight he can lift, but it doesn't take as much out of him as this guy who's squatting 800 or 900. Yes, this guy is stronger, but that takes so much more out of him because he's developed so much more skill and proficiency in that lift that he's able to coordinate and tax his body so much more to achieve that heavier lift, that it takes much more out of him, and it's going to take a lot longer to recover from. To give you kind of some more context, one of the first programs that I wrote was like my post-peak linear periodization program or whatever. And I used to, after I would compete, I would do something called a reverse ladder, and then I would do 10 by 10, 7 by 7, 5 by 5. So for example, my 10 by 10s would be at like 70%, and I could do it. So let's say at the time I was probably a 650 squatter. I could do 10 sets of 10 at 70%. It wasn't easy, but I could do it. Now that I squat closer to 8, I might be able to do 1 set of 10 at 70, and I'll be fucking smoked. But it's like, hey, you're stronger, you're fitter. You know, it's relative, right? It's 70% of your max. Why can't you do 10 sets? It's because my max as a more skilled and proficient lifter is going to take a lot more out of me. And 70% of that is going to take a lot more out of me than 70% of a beginner. So that was kind of a hard lesson when I first started deadlifting over 8 and squatting over 7, realizing that my last deadlift, it used to be a week out or 10 days out. Now it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks out. That's my last deadlift before competition. I'm not going to deadlift heavy or closer. Same thing with squat, maybe 10 days or 2 weeks, bench maybe a week. And I need that full reload, that full taper week in order to be able to actually display the strength that I've created during my training cycle on game day, where previously I could train much closer. And that was kind of a hard pill to swallow because, like you and many other people, I enjoy training. And in the onset, it was kind of challenging to accept and actually apply that fact that I need more rest in order to be able to perform. But the difference is dramatic. You know, I give myself a full 2 weeks of light technique work before a big competition, because if I don't, I'm not going to be able to recover from the stimulus provided and be able to actually perform on game day.
Yeah, definitely. I thought there was some really good points in there. Going back to the one about coaching in terms of, you know, having lots of education, whereas someone who's been in the trenches and, you know, put the hours underneath the bar. It goes right back to the start of the chat where it's getting buy-in with the clients, because ultimately as a coach you've got to be able to communicate with the client and know, yeah, do you know what, I know how you're feeling. Whereas what was going through my head, at one point I thought I was going to be a strength and conditioning coach for all the top rugby teams in the UK. It didn't pan out from that, mainly because I didn't really enjoy it as much. I enjoyed actually having more time in the gym. And there was other people who had done like masters in sport and exercise science. Really cool, a wealth of knowledge. But I remember we went in and we had to set up the gym, and they struggled setting up the gym, you know, getting everything sorted, which is kind of like, you know, how are you gonna,
what are you doing?
Yeah, how are you going to, you know, speak to people who are going to come in and lift if you've not experienced that yourself? And in terms of the competition side of things, I think, you know, what kind of shone through for me there is, you know, as beginners, there's a lot more space to get to the ceiling of getting to those maximum lifts. And then that's why, you know, competing a little bit more regular as a beginner, whereas, you know, competing at a higher level or a lot stronger, it is going to take a lot out of you. Whereas, you know, that's why the records, you know, are chipped, and the increases you know, are not as big as when you're going to be as a beginner. So yeah, I thought there was some really good points there. And as a chat, there was quite a lot of topics thrown in there, a couple of tangents thrown in. The last question that I like to ask from everything that we've chatted about there is, for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Basically understanding the holistic approach to this. People become very focused upon training and crushing their workouts. And in the onset, if you're new, yeah, that'll work. But eventually things are going to slow down, and your progress is going to stop. And then you try and train even harder, and then you get hurt or you get burnt out and you feel like shit. You have to look at the big picture, you know. There are all these concepts and ideas that people say, oh, it's 80% diet, 20%. It's like, forget that. It's 100% training. It's 100% nutrition. It's 100% recovery, right? That's it. That's the show. That's what's going to get you where you claim you want to be. And if you want to take away and not give 100% to any one of those 3 pillars, it's okay, but realize you're leaving some progress on the table. Another thing too is injuries, aches and pains. It's being able to understand the difference between an injury and just pain. I mean, you know, being sore is one thing, injury is another. And I see all the time people are constantly complaining about the same aches and pains for months and years. And it's like, get that looked at, get that checked out. Like just get it fixed. There's resources out there. Like, you don't have bad shoulders. You don't have a bad back. You don't have bad knees. Yeah, they feel like shit because you're not addressing it. Like, fix that stuff. Being able to take 1, 2, 3, 5, or 10 steps back is necessary more often than not to be able to take that one step forward. And with that comes the idea of like the long-term thing, this being a lifetime choice, a lifetime hobby, a lifetime investment, and not short-term. More often than not, you're going to have to take a couple steps back to be able to get forward, and that's okay. What that's going to do is it's going to take something that might be a 2 or 3 year issue and make it a 2 or 3 week issue. And then you can get back to training, you get back to growing, get back to adapting. So basically having the humility and the awareness to be able to address these things is what's going to help you make the progress that you want long-term. The resources are out there, and stop DMing me and asking my questions about injuries and stuff. I'm just some meathead that lifts weights. Go see a physio, go see a PT, get in front of them, let them get their hands on you and get better, feel better. You don't need to keep fighting these same injuries. Stop creating limitations. Instead create solutions. The guys and girls that have been doing it the longest are the ones that have the biggest numbers. That's why a lot of guys are still breaking records in their 40s, because they take care of themselves. Strength is a long-term investment, a long-term process. So it's so important to address these little things as they come up, so they stay little things and don't become catastrophic limiters like this pain in the ass right here.
Awesome. Some really good words of wisdom there. And I think that kind of wraps up, a lot of things that we spoke about in this chat. Thanks a lot, Steve, for taking the time to jump on. Really enjoyed chatting with you today.
I appreciate the opportunity.
No worries at all. Like I say, really enjoyed that chat. For everyone listening who might have questions about what we've chatted about today, obviously not questions about injuries. I completely agree. Like, go see somebody about that.
Like my back's bothering me. I'm like, okay. We're gonna look at.
For the topics that we've chatted about, or if people want to see the content that you put out there, where can people find you? Where can people reach out to you?
So my personal Instagram, I'm pretty active on there. That's at StrippCam, at STRIPPCAM. Don't get the wrong idea. It's my name, Steve Tripp, camera. Some people think I was in like the industry or something. I wasn't. So it's at StrippCam, that's me. And then of course my gym, at the Top Strength Project. We're here in Providence, Rhode Island, or Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And the website, topstrengthproject.com. We're always updating that. But probably the best way to get a hold of me is through Instagram. I'm on there more often than I'd like, but it serves me well. It's a great way to connect with people and get my workouts out there, get training out there. And also on the 1st, I will be releasing the first episode of the Top Strength Cast. That's going to be available everywhere: YouTube, Spotify, podcast apps, the whole nine. So we're going to be doing about an episode a week there. That's been taken off real well. I have 8 episodes recorded, so we're going to start releasing those on the 1st. So at StrippCam is me, at the Top Strength Project, or the topstrengthproject.com. And please keep your eyes out for the Top Strength Cast. I've had a lot of fun with that so far, and I think I'm going to be able to offer a good amount of value and content to those who are interested in listening. So that's me.
Awesome. I'll definitely be tuning in, especially with it just around the corner on the 1st. Thanks a lot, Steve, for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
All right. Thanks, Steve.